Mr. Williams is 80, having been born on March the 1st, 1922. My name is Margaret Lostrow, and I'll be the interviewer. Mr. Williams is the father-in-law of my brother. Jack, could you state for the recording what war and branch of service did you serve in?
This on? I served in the 10th Armored Division, 54th Armored Infantry Regiment, 10th Armored Infantry Battalion, Company B.
Okay. Which war was that?
World War II.
Okay. What was your rank?
Sergeant.
Okay. And where did you serve during your military?
Well, I did my basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, and then we moved around a couple other bases and wound up in the European Theater of Operations.
Okay. Now, I know you were born in the Minneapolis area.
Right.
And you left for the Army from there?
From there, right. I was going to the University of Minnesota at the time, and when we heard President Roosevelt declare war on Japan, we knew that we'd be in it before long. And so that's where I was drafted from there. I tried to volunteer, but my eyesight was so bad they rejected me. And it wasn't long afterwards they accepted me and put me in the infantry, which proves that the Army knows best.
Did you tell me a little bit about your experiences as far as, were you married at the time?
Right. June and I were high school sweethearts. She was 15 and I was 17 when we started keeping company, as they say. And she was 20 and I was 22 when we got married. I came home on a very short furlough from Fort Benning. And we got married. And then I left town almost immediately and left the country without her.
Okay. Now, what was your experience once you were overseas? Where did you land?
We went directly. We went by convoy and took what they call the southern route through the Azores, and it was a large convoy, and it was rather. And the ship I was on was not a bad ship; it was a fairly decent one. But the convoy would move all as one at certain times to avoid submarines. And usually there was a destroyer running up and down on the side of us, as like a flanker guard, I guess. And then we landed in Le Havre, France. This was after D-Day, about a month or two after. And the harbor there was a mess. Sunken ships are sunken by design as breakwaters. And from there we got our equipment cleaned up. And the Army, in all their wisdom, once again had deemed it necessary that all our weapons be covered with a grease called cosmoline, which we all learned to love, because it all had to be cleaned off, all your weapons, because they wouldn't work. The cosmoline was to save your weapons from the salt spray from the ship. Somebody thought this was a great idea. And we had to take all our insignia off. As we came into the harbor, there was a big banner up there saying, "Welcome, 10th Armored Division." This was after we'd taken all our insignia off, so nobody would know who we were. So again, the Army does work in wonderful ways. I have no bitterness towards the Army.
A little witticism.
No. All right.
Okay, then what happened after that?
Well,
did you have many friends? Did you really build friendships with?
Well, we were 2 years in the States training before we went overseas, so I had a lot of friends, and So that's one of the things that was good and bad, because as you saw good friends drop by the side, you had to just keep going. You developed a hard shell towards this type of thing. One of my good friends was a sergeant named Frank Zarikas out of Hamtramck, Michigan, who had been a member of the mob, evidently, in that area. He wanted to put me through law school after the war was over. But the last I saw Frank, we were both on a stretcher in a battalion aid station, and we were wearing overcoats, and he had a hand grenade go off in his pocket of his overcoat. All the force went out, and his leg was broken, but that's all. He didn't have any shrapnel. He was the most delighted guy in the world, because he's going to leave. We said goodbye. I knew I'd never see Frank again, and he's on his way to England or the United States for rehab. So he was a memorable character. Well, anyhow, then from there we wound up outside of Metz, France, and we were in General Patton's army, and we were out so far in front of everybody else we ran out of gas, so everything had to stop, and so we were stopped around there. But then from there we just wandered around Europe.
What battles were you involved in?
A battle consisted for medal purposes of 90 days in combat would be a battle. And I have 3 battle stars, so that means 180 days in combat. So I don't know what the battles were. They put different names on them, but they're just for medal purposes. And it meant something to the generals. It meant nothing at all to us. We didn't know where we were. We didn't know what we were doing. There was a complete, not a lack of communication, but the only thing you knew about was the people on your right and your left, and what was ahead. Usually there was nothing ahead. You were the front. And if you were in Patton's army, he wanted always to be out in front of all the other armies. So sometimes you got isolated. And so then we just, that's the way it was. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while you get pulled back in the rest area to get more men and get your equipment revitalized and be out. Well, one thing that was kind of interesting, you always knew you were going back on the line, as they called it. Now that's interesting. When you're on the line, you're actually on the line. There's nobody out in front of you. When you've gone to the rear, that could mean anything. If you're in the rear, that could be anything from 100 yards to 10 miles. You were in the rear. Mm-hmm. You were safe. And but you always knew you were going back up on the line when you'd see a truck come up with Red Cross ladies and donuts. That was a signal that you were going back up again, which was never. I never met anybody who was that gung-ho or heroic or anything. Anyone who came through all this was a complete hero in my mind. But I saw nothing of these things that you see in the movies. I saw a lot of scared people on both sides, and a lot of things happen that tell you that we're not all perfect people on both sides. There was a lot of atrocities committed on both sides. A lot of German prisoners were shot. A lot of American prisoners were shot needlessly because there wasn't any place to put them. They had no place for them. Just shoot them. And so that was pretty grim. And so you develop a very hard shell. You really do. You have to. I did wind up in England at one time in a psycho ward. battle fatigue, they called it. And you as a nurse would understand some of that stuff. I was a minor case, but I was back there. And they determined statistically that a person could withstand 80 days of combat before they cracked. And the hospitals were full of people who cracked. Some cracked in 5 days. My battalion commander didn't even last a day. But this ward I was in was for minor cases of battle fatigue, evidently, and our treatment was insulin shock treatment. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
She knows.
And but the surprising thing, he had to have a strong heart for it, and the bed would be completely soaked, and then you'd give you a little cup of grapefruit juice, bring it right out of it. And the worst cases were the ones they took up front to the psychiatrists, and they used scopolamine on them, which was a truth medicine used by the Germans. But that got some guys to talk who couldn't talk. We were so shocked out of it that they just couldn't talk. And, all of a sudden they'd be hollering and screaming, and at least they'd bring them out of it. Mm-hmm. And from there I went back to duty back on the continent. And the Army philosophy in those days, because they were running short of men, was that if they could walk, send them back. I went back 3 times. And one time I went back, I got as far as the regimental aid station. I was bleeding through my ears and my eyes, I think. And I was diagnosed, and I was sent back within 24 hours, diagnosed as pleurisy. But these are the things that are not the thing movies are made out of. But the combat infantryman, it's a lousy life. It's just a lousy life. There's only 3 things available to you. That you finally determine this when somebody tries to shoot you, is that you have 3 options. You can either live through it, you can get captured, or you can be wounded, or you can be killed. And that's all that's available, because all of us are in for the duration. So today we read about the horrors of a guy being sent out for 6 months duty. You feel sorry for him, but it just wasn't like that. Guys left home and they weren't seen for 4 years or more. So that's about it. Now I'll wait after the war. You want me to continue?
Well, there's a couple things. You tell us about the vehicle that you were in the armored division, right?
Right. I was in what they call a half-track, which is a personnel carrier. It carried a squad of 12 men and a driver, had a machine gun mounted on it, and you carried everything with you that you could on that vehicle. And all your food was what they called K rations, or like a Cracker Jack box, and that was they had a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they all seemed to like to me. But they were cold. You couldn't heat anything up because in the area you were at there was no lights or no fires permitted, no smoking, nothing like that. And the K rations consisted for many's a breakfast I had with cheese, cold cheese, lemonade, and there usually was a cigarette in that box. And you carried those with you, and you could carry several days food that way because you were self-contained. There was no mess hall, no nothing like that. But that's a lot of an infantryman. He has no place to sleep, he has no place to eat, and he just in all my days as an armored infantryman, I never dug a foxhole, never was in one. Mm-hmm. We never were there long enough. But
Where did you sleep at night?
on the ground. In extremely cold weather on the ground, you try to have a little depression to sleep in. And sometimes we carried on the half track something called a Bangalore torpedo, which was nitroglycerin packed in a pipe. And sometimes it was known that the Bangalore torpedo might go off in the middle of the night, and this would cause a little depression in the ground, and you could sleep in it. But mainly, you were told never to take your boots off, because you'd never get them back on again. And so frostbite there were a lot of frostbite cases.
Tell me about what you told me before about where you slept sometimes for a while to keep the warmth.
Well, in the half-track motor, it would be warm, and as a sergeant, squad leader, I'd have the rank to be able to lay on the hood until it got stone cold. And something like that. One day we're out there and we're within hailing distance of the Germans. We can hear them, they can hear us, and nobody's going anywhere that day. But we've been out there for some time, and all of a sudden we hear a siren. And who roars up in a half-track with flags flying but George Patton. And he was very critical of us because we had not shaved and we weren't wearing neckties. Which, but
He just felt terrible.
well, we just weren't dressy enough for him. But anyhow, after the war, you want me to continue?
Sure.
I wind up in the Ruhr Valley in Germany. By that time, I'd been separated from my division. And
There wasn't
I remember
left.
one doctor told me one time in some place, he says, well, he says, we're going to have to put you on limited duty. And I said, Doc, if you don't mind, I'll give you a big hug, which meant I didn't go back to the Armored Infantry. But anyway, I wind up after the war up in the Ruhr Valley, which was with the British and the French Army. We had a contingent of Americans. I don't know what we were doing up there, really. We Americans took over a house up there anyhow. But it was full of Russian slave laborers. They've been working in the mines, the coal mines, during the war. And they had, and they looked on the German army when they first hit their lines as liberators. And so they welcomed them with flowers and everything else, and then they find themselves working down the coal mine in the Ruhr Valley. And so anyhow, they were there, and they were wild. They were behind barbed wire. The British were supposed to guard them, and they were going to be sent back to Russia. That was our policy at that time. And they didn't want to go back to Russia. They knew if they went back, they probably weren't going to survive. And so it was pretty... In fact, I had a guy who got the notice that he was due to be discharged. He was from Chicago, and he could speak Russian. I couldn't find him. And he told me, well, he's down with the Russians. And so I went down there to this compound to get him out of there. Military discipline was a little sluggish in those days. And at any rate, they were all drunk. Somehow they got a hold of vodka or something down there. All crazy down there. They'd been going on for days. And he didn't want to leave. And I told him, you got to get out of here. You're going home. And he was having a great time. And he was a little guy. And I had taken my weapon off and left it off outside in the Jeep with the driver. And there I am in the middle of this bunch of wild men. And he doesn't want to leave. And there was only one thing I could do, and I hit him as hard as I could, because he was small, and dragged him out of there. Well, ever since then, I got shot at in that town. Now, this is after the war, and I was very happy to get out of that town. Believe me, I'd go down if I had business in town. I'd go down doorway to doorway, and they didn't try to kill me, I don't think, but they were shooting above my head. I'd go down in the mine. I remember this. I was so dumb when I think about it, because the Germans evidently were very willing to see the war end. And we never had any incidents of anyone doing anything against the occupation people. But every morning I'd go down to the coal mine and take a bath. A huge bathtub. You could pull a thing across and read a magazine or shave. It was really great. You could swim in this thing. It was so big. It was where the officers bathed. And give the caretaker there a cigarette, and that opened the door. But I've often thought about that. I was pretty dumb. There I am laying in a big bathtub in an occupied country. But nobody came after me, except the Russians. And that was pitiful. When the Russians were put on freight cars to send them back to Russia, they jump out of the ring, off the cars, and start running into the woods. They knew what was going to happen to them, and our job was to get them and bring them back, and that was not a pleasant thing to do. So these are the things that happen sometimes.
Yeah. Did your unit take many casualties?
Over 100%.
No, really.
So that's why I say the toughest job in the Army is a replacement. And he doesn't know anybody. He doesn't know why he's there. He doesn't know what's going on, and nobody. And he's kind of resented in a way because he's taken the place of a friend. And that was the worst job in the Army, I think.
Now I heard that you were in the Battle of the Bulge. Is that right?
Right, and there was a situation where this was a very quiet sector, and they usually in these quiet sectors they'd put a green outfit up there just to get the feel of things. Not much would be happening. In this case, I think it was the 106th Infantry Division was on the line, and how our intelligence missed this, I don't know, but the German army was poised and ready to come through, and their goal was to go to Antwerp. A dumb thing, but they came through in force, and they completely disorganized I think it was 106. They took prisoners. Guys left their weapons and fled. So when this news hit, we were just south of this town of Bastogne, which was really the place where everything had to come through. And so a third of our division was sent up there on an overnight march on the road. You go as fast as you can, and we're sent up there. And Eisenhower, and as I get the story, the generals are way back, and of course they see what's going on. And we were available, so they sent us up there. A third, just 5,000 men. And the 101st Airborne was on leave in Paris. And they roamed the streets of Paris with bullhorns telling the guys to report, get back to their unit, and which they did, and they went back up to this town of Bastogne in trucks. Half of them didn't have their weapons with them, didn't have proper clothing, and we were already up there, and that was the brunt of the German offensive at any rate, and it was stopped at that point. Although the 101st and my outfit, we were completely surrounded, and but they didn't get through. In fact, over a period of time, they ran out of fuel. One of my memories is as we were going up there, I see this truck coming towards us, loaded with 5-gallon cans of gasoline, and stopped the driver, and we asked him, well, "Where's the front?" And I'll never forget this. He looked at me, and his eyes were like saucers. He said, "There ain't no front, man." But his job was to get the gasoline out of there, because the Germans wanted that was part of their plan, was to take over the gasoline depots that we had up there, and they didn't get them. So that was about it. Then I had trouble getting home, but
Were you wounded more than once during all that battle?
right. Well, before that too, but that was the main battle, really. But then my division kept on going and wound up in Czechoslovakia. I wasn't with them at that time, and that's why I've never gone to a divisional reunion or anything. I wouldn't know anybody. All the guys I knew either didn't make it or.
You were lucky. I guess you've got lucky.
It was one of my best buddies, and I don't talk about this very much, but we were the first troops into Germany. We'd been up in Luxembourg on a 30-minute alert, and we were going to head across this river, a small river. But every time the engineers would throw a pontoon bridge across it, the Germans would knock it out with artillery fire. So finally we got the word at 3. We were in a gym somewhere. We got the word we were ready to move out. 3 in the morning, raining, and we got across this pontoon. The engineers did a great job. The MPs did a great job. They were standing on that bridge with hooded flashlights, so he didn't run off into the river, and got us across. And that's when my a real good buddy got it. We were going through this little bitty town, but the towns, all the buildings were all put together. You know, there wasn't any space in between them. And the Germans were shelling what they call, I forget what they call them. Anyhow, the shell would go off before it hit the ground. And this friend of mine was in the half-track ahead of me, and the half-track stopped, and he said something was wrong with Bob. And I go up, I pulled him onto the half-track, wasn't a mark on him. And but he was deaf in one ear. I remember that. Evidently, he didn't. If you heard anything coming in, you ducked down, at least get a little cover in the half-track. But the next morning, I see him along with a bunch of other bodies just piled up alongside the road.
That's a tough stuff. Well, there's so much
It was
ugly stuff.
well, there wasn't a mark on him,
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
concussion got him evidently. And so that's why you get very hardened to some of this stuff, and why I don't have much truck with some of these professional veterans, which is wrong of me, but they don't. Nothing to say about where they went, but well, yeah,
It's tough.
It's I'm glad that they are at least making people of my generation and younger aware of all these things, so that, you know, and I am noticing on certain holidays more people saying thanks.
well, it's always, again, these are things that you don't. There's a lot more than this, but then I couldn't get out of the Army.
Oh no, they didn't want you. Now you can't get out.
Well, I spent the day that Germany surrendered. I was in some camp in Belgium someplace.
Yeah, you were in. I would have the address someplace, but I can't.
So I hear the war is over, and oh man, I'm going home. Well, they had what they called cigarette camps, and these were Camp Lucky Strike, Camp 20
All the
Grand, and
difference of
so
that
on.
kind
And
of
this is
spirit.
where guys were sent to either be sent elsewhere or to go home or whatever. And I wound up on in one of these camps as permanent party. And so the guys are being processed down to the lowest 50 points. I got over 100 points. I'm over here processing. And so I went down and, well, first I'd been put in with, I know how I got on a permanent party. I'd been assigned to a combat engineer outfit. And all of a sudden I'm training them how to shoot machine guns and so on. And then I find out they're going to Japan. The war in Japan was still going on. I go to the battalion surgeon. I said, look, I'm not supposed to be on limited duty. And he agreed with me for once and put me on the permanent party at the cigarette camp, processing guys to go home. And so that's where I stayed for a while. But the command, there are several of us guys in that category. And we finally marched on the colonel and said, look, there's something wrong here. We should be home by now. And he says, well, hell, guys with that many points as you have, there must be something wrong with you.
Wasn't that nice?
Yeah, you're probably just out of the stockade or someplace. And so that's how that happened. And then this combat engineer outfit that I got out of, they went down to Marseille and got on a boat, and it turned around because Japan surrendered. Then they went to New York from there. So I could have been on that boat. So these are the things that happen. It don't make much sense. I was able, when I was on permanent party, I was the first sergeant for a while, but somebody with more time and grade came in, and then you always give it to them. And but I had written a series of 3-day passes, and I was within an hour or so of Paris. I spent a lot of time in Paris after the war. A lot of time. I lived well.
Right? Your mother and your sister and I always asking you to buy us something in Paris. Never.
Well, they had PXs there, and you had a ration book, and you could get just so many things off this ration book. Well, some guy made a fortune. He sent home and got ink eradicator.
Oh, gee.
And there were 3 PXs on this big camp. And with ink eradicator, you could take your ration book and get a lot of cigarettes. And that's how I lived in Paris.
And that was important.
So how was it? When did you? What made them finally let you go home?
Well, finally, somebody agreed that, yes, we should go home. So we go down to Antwerp, and we got on this, what they call Liberty ships. And they made a lot of them. There's only one left I just read the other day. And they were made in San Francisco at the Kaiser shipyards.
Did the job.
But we got on this Liberty boat. And Antwerp, I found out, is not a real seaport. It's 40 miles inland on a river. And it was New Year's Eve when we left. And some Navy ships were in there, and they had ice all over them, and superstructure was bent. And we're going out in this stuff. So out we went. And it took us 26 days to go from Antwerp to New York, which is a lot. And I was in the forward hold in a hammock, and up on the 3rd or 4th row of the forward hold, and it was bad.
Yeah.
You ate 2 times a day if you could eat, and saw the Queen Elizabeth 3 times, coming, going back and forth. But that was not a good boat ride.
One thing that hits me right now, I'm thinking your mother and your sister and I were so wanting to see you in your uniform.
No, they never
you know?
did. They never
He
did.
got home and it's gone. He want no more of it.
Put a suit of my dad's on. His dad was quite a
And
bit
your
shorter
dad was
than I
shorter.
I wore the pants down to here somewhere. And,
Oh, yeah.
So
Right.
how did you look when you came in?
terrible. Terrible. I had it wasn't a uniform.
I don't think we cared, though.
Well, I
your
must have
mother,
sold
your
everything.
sister,
I
and
must have sold everything.
Yes, you did.
And
You just couldn't
selling
get
was,
rid of the stuff
well, it
fast
got
enough.
to be a disease, all the selling it did. And, I remember one day in the cigarette camp, they had my goal that day, I had a tanker's jacket, and it was ripped and torn. And I said, I'm not gonna leave the tent today and see what I can do with this thing. And I wound up with a brand new jacket and I don't know, a lot of money, just by trading back and forth.
Oh,
I drop off in the freight yards in Paris, out in the yards with a duffel bag full of cigarettes, and because you didn't dare go into the train station because the MPs were there. They frowned on black marketing. And stayed in a very nice hotel. Went to this one place where you sold all the cigarettes and go through the charade of bartering. And the worst cigarette, I forget what it was, 20 grand or something, just like
sounds like it.
a cheap cigarette. He made it sound like this was the tops. They paid top price for that.
It was the only kind of time they could then I remember.
Pay
my dad.
$1 a carton at the PX, sell for $20 a carton in Paris. That was a pretty good markup.
Yeah, I think.
Never
cigarettes
stayed
were
in a
maybe
Red
20
Cross
cents a
hotel.
pack then.
I stayed in the finest hotel. Remember it had a crystal chandelier. Paris had been an open city. It wasn't destroyed. And lived well, but couldn't send any money home.
So what did you do when you got home? You said something about you were able to get finish your education, right?
Right. I went back to the University of Minnesota, and only because I was before the war. When the war broke out, I was in school, and I was not a good student, to say the least.
He wasn't very interested, really.
So now the war is over, and I'm going back to school, and the only reason they took me on probation was the fact that I was a veteran. They had to by law.
A little worn up there.
And so that's how I got back into school. It's amazing how your perspective changed, how you become a good student.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically my Army career. Some of it good, some of it pretty lousy. I've never been interested in joining up again.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So
Okay, well.
that's about it. Anything else?
Not unless you have something you'd like to.
Well, I did have one experience, so from Fort Benning. You got a minute on this one?
Sure.
It's kind of funny. The Army had they had something called the ASTP program, Army Specialized Training Program, and they felt they would take guys from regular outfits and send them to college and train them to be different things. And they were going to make. So I went down to Auburn, Alabama, and this is where they they tested people. Then it was called Alabama Polytechnic Institute, now known as Auburn. And so I went down there, and this is great because my outfit was going on maneuvers, and here I am, I'm down on the college campus. And
Do you shoot?
so I took all I knew about it. You had several tests you could take, depending on what you felt you might be qualified for. And I thought, well, psychology would be great. I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded pretty good. And so I get in this room, and I'm taking this test, and it has nothing. It has all to do with math. It's multiple question. And I went up to the man, I said, I think I'm in the wrong room. He says, take the test. I said, well, I'll take the test. I was the first one done. Because I didn't know what I was doing, just check things off. I passed with high grades. And I went back and I said, a terrible mistake has been made. I can't be an engineer. That's what they were going to make you, an engineer in 1 year.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's too late. The orders have been cut and sent to Atlanta. You're here. And so there I was down in
Well,
Auburn.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, Auburn. Yeah, you had some colleging there.
Oh, yeah. Well, the whole program
But
collapsed
the whole
because they
fell
were
apart. Yeah.
trying to compress college education into 1 year. We went to school from 9 to 9, but then guys just got disgusted and didn't show up, and the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So I went back to my outfit.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I got sent back to my original outfit. A lot of guys didn't.
Yeah.
But everyone who went had to be busted back to private.
Oh, really?
But the food was good. They had a
Just the money
civilian
was less.
dietitian. All the teachers were civilians.
Of course, all that big money you were making. What was, I
Right.
forget, what was it, $40 a
I
month?
don't, wasn't much.
I think
But,
40 a month was.
But that was an interesting concept. My cousin went to school here at UC under that same program. And
Is that Jerry?
yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard of that.
Yeah. But it was a big program, but it just was. Somebody thought it was a great idea, evidently.
And that's right after you went into the service, right?
Oh yeah, I was in training down Fort Benning, and I got called in one day and said, "Well, you've been selected to go to ASDP." I didn't know what it meant, but fine. They're going to Carolina on maneuvers. But
Didn't turn out
Well,
that way.
well, then when you got out, were you on the GI Bill to finish school? or-
right, yeah, that paid for your tuition and books and $90 a month because I was married, and we lived pretty well.
90 bucks. 90 bucks. And we
Yeah.
lived at with my folks.
Well,
I don't think we could have done that well otherwise.
Well, we did. Yeah, you're right. But we paid rent.
That's right, we did.
We paid, yes.
Now, and then, the funny thing too, I'm trying to think of it. My folks lived in the second story of a dupler, and the first, bedroom was open to the dining room. So there's a little living room, big dining room, and an open bedroom here, and a little tiny bed back here. Good sized kitchen. I don't know why they made stuff like that, you know? If they're going to have two bedrooms, somebody ought to have a door. And you think, you know, all of us grew up where there was one bathroom in the house.
Okay, so then your first job after college, what was that?
I went to work for a company called Butler Brothers, who they were wholesalers, and I was the assistant manager of the toy department.
Huh?
And their biggest customer, if you ever remember, the Ben Franklin stores.
Oh, yes.
Well, those Butler Brothers supplied them. So it was an interesting job.
What is it?
Well, I tell you what, I certainly appreciate you doing this interview.
Well,
I know it wasn't easy.
glad you came over.
And,
Yeah, it's kind of nice. We get to know her better.
and vice versa.